You didn't lose anything. Nothing broke. Nobody left. And yet one morning, you woke up inside the life you worked hard to build, looked around at all of it, the job, the routine, the relationships, the identity you've been maintaining, and felt something close to suffocation. Not dramatic, not a crisis exactly, just a quiet, persistent sense that the walls have moved in, that the shape of your days no longer matches the shape of something inside you that's been growing without your permission. That feeling has a name, and more importantly, it has a reason. We tend to treat restlessness as a problem to be solved, a symptom of ingratitude, or evidence that something is wrong with us. But there is another way to understand it entirely, one that is far more honest and far more useful. Sometimes a life stops fitting not because it was the wrong life, but because you have grown beyond the version of yourself who needed it. Let's sit with that for a moment, because it matters. When we are young, or simply at an earlier chapter, we build our lives around a particular understanding of who we are. We choose a path, a role, a set of values, a way of presenting ourselves to the world. And for a time, that structure holds us well. It gives us direction, belonging, and a sense of coherent identity. It answers the question, who am I? But identity is not a fixed object. It is, in one psychological sense, more like a living thing, something that continues to develop beneath the surface of daily life, even when we are not paying attention to it. And there comes a point, for many people, when the inner self has quietly outpaced the outer life. The structure that once felt like home begins to feel like a costume. The role that once felt meaningful begins to feel performed. This is not failure. This is growth arriving at the door. One way to understand this is through the idea that we carry multiple selves across a lifetime. Not in any fragmented or disordered sense, but in the natural sense that who you are at 22 is genuinely different from who you are at 35, or 48, or 60. Each of those versions of you had real needs, real fears, and real wisdom. Each one built something appropriate to its moment. The difficulty arises when we remain loyal to an old version of ourselves long after that version has served its purpose. There is a particular kind of grief in this that rarely gets acknowledged. It is the grief of outgrowing something you genuinely loved, the career you chose with real passion, the relationship that was once deeply nourishing, the city, the friend group, the belief system, the self-image. None of these things need to have been wrong in order for you to have moved beyond them. And yet we often treat the feeling of having moved beyond them as a betrayal, of the people who supported us, of the younger self who worked so hard, of the life we publicly committed to. That guilt is understandable, but it is worth examining carefully because it can keep people trapped inside lives that no longer serve them for years, sometimes decades. Thinkers across philosophy and psychology have long observed that human life tends to move through genuine transformations of the self, not as a neat ladder of progress, but as real shifts in how we understand ourselves and what we need. What these traditions share is a recognition that growth is not always comfortable, and it is not always chosen. Sometimes it simply happens to you, and the question becomes whether you will honor it or suppress it. From a psychological perspective, meaning is not something we find once and keep forever. What gave your life a sense of purpose at one stage may genuinely not be sufficient at another, and that is not a sign of emptiness. It is a sign that you are being called to a deeper engagement with your own existence. This is one reason why the quarter-life crisis and the midlife reset are not simply cultural cliches. They are real psychological events, and they tend to arrive at moments when the gap between the inner self and the outer life becomes too wide to ignore. The 20s are often a time when the structures we inherited, from family, from education, from social expectation, begin to feel insufficient for the person we are actually becoming. The 40s can bring a similar reckoning when the achievements we spent decades pursuing are finally in hand, and we discover that they do not answer the deeper question we forgot we were asking. In both cases, the feeling is similar. A life that once fit no longer does. What makes this so disorienting is that the feeling often arrives without a clear cause. There is no obvious villain, no single event to point to. Just a slow accumulation of mornings where something feels slightly off. A growing difficulty in pretending to care about things you used to care about naturally. A strange envy of people who seem to be living more freely, more authentically, more in alignment with something you cannot quite name. That envy, incidentally, is worth paying attention to. Not to indulge it, but to read it. What we envy in others often points directly at what we are hungry for in ourselves. It is one of the more honest signals the psyche sends, precisely because we rarely choose to feel it. So what do you do when you recognize this pattern in yourself? The first and perhaps most important thing is to resist the urge to make a dramatic decision immediately. The feeling of a life no longer fitting is real and valid, but it is not an emergency. It is an invitation to a longer, more honest conversation with yourself, one that deserves time and care, not panic. Begin by separating the signal from the noise. Not everything that feels uncomfortable is a sign that something must change. But not everything uncomfortable should be suppressed either. The question to sit with is this: is this discomfort the kind that comes from growth pressing against old limits, or is it the kind that comes from a specific, addressable problem? These are different things, and they call for different responses. It can also help to grieve honestly. If you have outgrown something, a role, a relationship, a version of yourself, that loss is real, even if what you are moving towards is better. Allowing yourself to feel the weight of that, rather than rushing past it into optimism or self-criticism, is not weakness. It is the kind of emotional honesty that makes genuine transition possible. And then slowly, begin to ask what the new chapter might actually require of you. Not what it should look like from the outside. Not what would impress people or make sense on paper, but what would feel true. What would feel like you, the you that exists now, not the one who made the original plan. Starting over in this sense is rarely as dramatic as it sounds. It is more often a series of small, deliberate movements towards greater alignment. A conversation you've been avoiding, a commitment you've been postponing, a part of yourself you've been keeping quiet that deserves, finally, to be heard. The life that no longer fits is not evidence of a mistake. It is evidence of movement. It means you have not stood still. It means that something in you has continued to grow, even when the world around you stayed the same. That is not a problem to be fixed. That is a human being becoming more fully themselves. And that, quietly and without fanfare, is one of the most meaningful things a person can do. If this video gave you something to think about, you might find our other explorations of identity, meaning, and the inner life worth your time. And if it spoke to something you've been carrying quietly, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.